I'm making some 4th of July bunting, but this video isn't actually about bunting. I wanted to share a couple of different ways that I use freezer paper in my sewing and quilting projects. If you are interested in making bunting, I'll link to my how to make bunting video in the description box below. At the end of that video, I show a couple of different ways to finish and customize bunting, including the reverse applique technique I want to show you today. I also want to show you how to make a cutting template out of freezer paper, so let's start there. I pieced this strip set using 2.5-inch strips, and now I want to cut them in a uniform 60-degree triangles, but my 60-degree triangle ruler is way too small. So this is where my freezer paper template comes in. I start by folding my freezer paper in half, doubling it over on itself, and then ironing it together with the waxy side on the inside. So you're left with the sort of matte side out and the sticky side in, sticking the strip together. Then I use my two tiny 60-degree ruler as a template. So imagine this freezer paper is a long rectangle. I'm going to align the tip to the top, and then I bring in one of my other trusty quilting rulers and I just butt it up to the side. Then when I take my template away, I can cut along there and I've got my first edge. And then I just flip it over and I can do the same thing again. So I'd line it up there again. I'd use my trusty ruler here, butt it up, and then make another cut. And that's how I get my freezer paper template. Before I use my template, I add a little tape to the back to give it a little stickiness. It'll help hold the template in place while I'm cutting. I just do the old roll method, so you get your little tape loop, and then I put it on the corners and the sides. The tape will lose stickiness after a while, but that's not a big deal because you don't really need a lot of tack. You just want it to grip the fabric lightly so it doesn't slide around while you're cutting. And it's pretty easy to replace if it becomes really unhelpful. Now I just line up my template and give it a quick rub, make sure it's all tacked down. And you might notice that my ends here are tapered. I offset them by 1 inch so that I waste less fabric, and it actually helps me get an extra triangle out of this strip set. So I make sure my template is ready, and I get my other ruler, and then I'm going to be lining up the edge of my ruler so that it just barely covers my template. I don't want any piece of template poking out from underneath because I don't want to cut it and make things uneven. So I'm double checking everything's looking good. I don't see any template, and so I can make my cut. Then I just turn it around because it's easier for me to cut from this side, and I make my next cut. You could save this for some interesting scraps. That could go in the scrap bin. Then you just peel the template off, and you've got your triangle. So you just go through the whole strip set, cutting, repositioning, cutting, repositioning, and you get all these great stripy triangles. Quick word of warning though, this isn't the most accurate way of cutting, so if you're doing something that's very fussy, that needs a lot of precision, I'd say skip this and try to get a good ruler to maintain accuracy. But if you have a project that doesn't need to be super accurate, something that's more forgiving, or maybe it's not decorative, or it won't be seen a lot by other people, then this is a good choice. So I'd say just be a little picky, pick and choose where you want to use this. But in this case, it's super simple and a great use of the technique. Let's move on to this reverse applique now. I'm going to be using my Cricut Maker to cut out my pieces, and this is something you definitely can do by hand. I just prefer the Cricut Maker because I hate cutting and tracing and, all of that. But this really speeds it up, and it's neater, faster, more accurate. So all around, just a great workhorse for the craft room, even for sewing and quilting projects. I started my design on my iPad with Affinity Designer for iPad, and I, sized it how I wanted, and I rounded corners, and I stretched and everything to get my star just how I wanted it. And then I exported it and then imported it into Cricut. And so here I am, I'm ready to get cutting. I'm going to use my iPad every step of the way. I didn't need my computer at all. I've got my freezer paper loaded onto the standard grip mat, and I cut away all the excess freezer paper with just this run-of-the-mill rotary cutter. And now I'm going to load it into my machine. There's a little flashing button right here. It's going to load it in. And then when this button starts flashing, that means you can go ahead and start cutting. If you're interested in getting a Cricut of your own, you should definitely go check out their site right now. I think they're having some of the best sales I've ever seen. So check it out. But no pressure. You can totally do this by hand if you want. Okay, so it's done cutting, and now I just have to unload the mat. And I don't know if the camera's gonna pick this up, but I've got 4 star templates on here. There is a trick to getting these off efficiently, to get the freezer paper pieces off efficiently. I'm still a little clumsy at it, but practice makes perfect, and I need more practice. Anyway, I like to use this little spatula doodad, and I'm going to show you how not to do it first. So I'm going to lift up the corner and just peel it back. You want to be gentle so you don't rip anything. This is absolutely the wrong way to do it. It is such a mess. This is salvageable, but it is just a pain to work with, and it just curls up and is a jumbled mess. But if you turn it on its side and you roll the mat and peel the paper, it comes off much flatter. Although I think I'm more prone to ripping the paper when I do it this way. But again, practice makes perfect. Okay, so still a little bendy, but it's not knotted up mess, And to get this little bit of bend out, I sort of glide it over my finger, and it makes it just a little bit neater, a little easier to work with. So just glide it like so. In the long run, it's not going to matter if it's a little wavy because it'll flatten out when I iron it to my fabric. And don't throw these away. These can be used for the more traditional freezer paper applique. And they're all cut out for you. I have a stash started, and I'm gonna keep these in my scrap bin, I think. Let's see what they look like if you just pull them up. Not so bad. Looks good. Once my freezer paper templates are all removed from the mat and cut out and everything, it's time to finally work with some fabric. So I'm going to take one of my navy triangles and fold it in half and finger press down the middle. And I'm not going to use my iron because I just want a light mark. I don't want like a deep crease. Then I'm going to use my ruler to measure 1.5 inches from the top. So by doing this, I can make sure that each of my stars will be uniform and lined up the same. So I can use my crease here and match it to the point of my star up here, and then this point down here. And then when that's lined up, I can bring in my ruler, or not my ruler, my iron. And make sure you're doing this on the wrong side of your fabric too. Just going to press this down. And see, it all flattens out. And once this is cool, I can move, once the freezer paper is cool, I can move on to the next step. Using some sharp snips, I'm gonna make a quick little cut in the middle of my star. And then I'm gonna cut out this shape, leaving about 1/4 inch, maybe a generous 1/4 inch around all the edges. Yeah, generous 1/4 inch. When you're done trimming the excess of the star, you're gonna wanna make a couple snips, or one snip to the point of each star. You wanna get to the edge of the paper, but not beyond it. Now I need to baste this seam allowance up and over the freezer paper like so. And I'm going to use just a plain old Elmer's glue stick, but I don't want to glue directly onto this wool mat, so I'm going to use a cereal box to protect my mat, like so. If I'm being honest, I think that I personally use way too much glue when I do this. So, you know, the less you use now, the easier it will be to remove the paper later on. But I get carried away. So I apply the glue to the edges, and then I fold up the seam allowance, and I do it all bit by bit so the glue doesn't dry before I get to it. Just a word of warning, you're gonna get glue all over your fingers when you do this. I want to mention that the tips of these stars might fray with heavy use. Most of the projects I use this technique on are decorative, and they aren't likely to be handled much or go through the wash a bunch. So I haven't had a problem with it, but that's something to keep in mind. If you have a fray check or a fray stopper that you like, you might want to apply it to sharp points like this. I'm going to quickly baste on the white squares, and then I'm going to let everything dry, and then I can pick up from there. When I applique, I like to make sure and use a thread that matches whichever fabric is on top. In this case, it's the navy. So I got a nice navy thread that blends in really well. And then I just use the super simple applique stitch, which I'm not going to demo here because it would be almost impossible to film because these are such dark colors, it's hard to pick up. But if you want a more detailed explanation or demonstration of the applique stitch, leave me a comment below and I'll make a quick video about it. Okay, I've finished appliquing my star down, and you can see I didn't take teeny tiny stitches. If I were doing this on something that would be washed a lot, I think I'd take smaller stitches. But for this purpose, for my bunting, it really wasn't necessary. So I took those big stitches, and you really can't tell from the front side. You especially won't be able to tell when you're viewing it from the curb. So, really clean finish. There's just a couple steps left before I can finish making my bunting. A little cleanup. So I'm gonna get my sharp snips back. I'm gonna cut off this excess fabric. We don't need this. I am not gonna be using my good scissors to cut the paper though, you'll notice. So I'll do that all the way around, and then after that is cut, then I'm gonna come through, and since it's not gonna be washed, I'm just gonna rip away my freezer paper. If this was a quilt, I would be much more diligent about, getting every single piece out of there and trying not to be too rough with my stitches and just being all around more gentle. But for this bunting, I'm just going to do some rough cuts and some rips. Some of you might be wondering why I didn't do a more traditional applique method, and that's because I knew I wanted my stars to be white, and I hate that look of that I tend to get when I do applique with white pieces, where you can see all of the seam allowance tucked under. But this way I don't have to see my seam allowances, and it comes out nice and neat and crisp. But this technique is definitely doable. I mean, this bunting could have definitely been done using traditional applique. If you are going to be super diligent about your freezer paper, don't be too rough with your stitches. You could pull them right out. Also, if you have trouble removing your freezer paper, you can try wetting it down. Okay, I'm going to call that done. And there you have it. Nice and neat and crisp, and you can't see any of my seam allowance folded under. So I'm going to finish these up using the techniques I shared in my how to make bunting video. If you want to see that video, again, I'm going to leave that in the link. I'm going to leave a link for that in the description below. And all the tools and supplies I used in the video, I'll link in my description as well. Thanks for watching. I'll see you again soon.